"She may serve," Sir Gerald Fenmore said, waving his glass at the door, "since she is fit for nothing else this season." The Duke of Greymarsh looked up, and the floor went out from under the whole evening, because the young woman coming through that door with the soup tureen in her hands was the woman who had saved his life on the Barrowmere Road. He'd not move. 30 years of being looked at had taught him that much. A duke who startles gives away more than a duke who is robbed. He sat with his fingers on the stem of his glass while she came down the length of the table in a housemaid's grey stuff gown and a coarse apron, with her hair scraped back and her chin exactly level, and set the tureen at his elbow. She did not look at him, not once. Whatever else Miss Fenmore was, she was not a fool, and a woman with a tureen in her hands does not greet a duke as an acquaintance in front of her father's guests. "You will forgive the theatre, your grace," Sir Gerald said comfortably. He was a broad pink man with a laugh. He used the way other men use a stick. Mardo Nerissa has lately formed a high opinion of herself. She was offered Mr. Pike of Kelsing, 900 a year and a house on the square, and she refused him. Refused him. "So I have told her, 'Very well, my girl, if you will not be a wife you shall learn what the alternative looks like. She serves at table until she recovers her senses.'" There was laughter along the table. "Not enough," Orlando said. "How long has she been recovering them?" 3 weeks tomorrow. Sir Gerald was delighted to be asked. "She is a stubborn creature. Gets it from her mother." "I see," said the Duke of Greymarsh, and lifted the lid off the tureen himself, which no one at that table had ever seen a duke do, and served himself, and said nothing more for a quarter of an hour. He was seeing a different room. 14 months ago, in the second week of November, his chaise had gone over on the Barrowmere Road in weather that came sideways. He remembered the crack of the axle and the horses screaming and the ditch water coming in cold at his collar, and then nothing useful for a while. He remembered his coachman shouting somewhere above him and a light swinging in the rain. Then a young woman in a soaked cloak, kneeling in the mud with a shepherd's lantern, saying in a perfectly level voice, "Your arm is out of its socket, sir, and I am going to put it back, and you are going to be extremely rude to me for about 4 seconds. She had done it. He had been extremely rude to her, though not for 4 seconds. He had made a sound he was not proud of and then apologized in 3 languages. She had got him and the coachman into a shepherd's hut, built the fire up, cut her own petticoat into strips to strap his shoulder, and fed them bread and dripping while the storm took the roof apart above them. She had a red mark on her cheek that was not from the rain. He had asked about it, and she had said, "The weather," and changed the subject. At first light he had offered her his purse. She had looked at it the way one looks at a rude word. "Your name, then," he had said. "You may call me nothing at all, sir." She had said, "I would rather have done it for nothing than be paid for it." She had gone out into the grey with her lantern, and he had spent 11 months looking for her. He had sent men to Barrowmere. The shepherd who owned the hut had died in the spring, and the hut had fallen in. Nobody within 9 miles admitted to a daughter out of doors on such a night, which he had understood eventually to mean something ugly about a house he could not identify. He had kept one thing. She had bound his hand with a handkerchief, plain linen, mended at one corner with no monogram, only a small brown bird worked in the hem in thread the colour of tea. A wren. He had carried it in his breast pocket for 14 months like a man carrying a lottery ticket he knew was worthless. The soup went round. The Fenmore table talked about the hunt. Orlando watched her work. She did it well, which he found he minded more than if she had done it badly. She was quick and silent. She anticipated the glasses, and she took the sneers as they came from her father's neighbour, who called her the parlour maid and thought it very good, from her own aunt, who told her twice to stand straighter, from Sir Gerald himself, who observed to the table that a woman's pride was like a horse's, and both were improved by a fortnight of light work. At the second course a guest named Harworth, who had drunk his wine and everyone else's, put out his boot as she passed. She did not fall. She turned it into a step the way a dancer does, and the dish never shook. But her father saw, and instead of speaking to Harworth he said, "Steady, girl. That gravy is worth more than your opinions." The table laughed again. Longer this time. The Duke of Greymarsh set down his knife. He had spent his adult life avoiding scenes on the sound principle that a duke who makes them is a duke who is discussed. He had sat through a great many dinners with his face arranged. He discovered, in the space between one breath and the next, that he did not intend to sit through this one. "Miss Fenmore," he said. The whole table turned. She stopped with the dish in her hands, and for the first time in 3 hours she looked at him, and he saw her recognize him, properly, fully, and go white to the lips. "Put that down," said the Duke of Greymarsh. Sir Gerald laughed uncertainly. "Your Grace, she has the fish." "Put it down," Orlando said again, and his voice did not rise at all, which was how the room understood that something had gone very wrong for somebody. She set the dish on the sideboard, very carefully, as though it were the last thing in the world she would ever be asked to carry. And the Duke of Greymarsh stood up. 18 people sat perfectly still and watched a duke walk the length of a dining room. He stopped a yard from her, which was as close as a man may stand to a woman in an apron without shaming her further, and he took out of his breast pocket a square of plain linen, mended at one corner, with a small brown wren worked into the hem. "Do you know this?" he said. She looked at it a long moment. "I do." "Say where I got it." "On the Barrowmere Road," said Nerissa Fenmore. "In November, in the rain, off a gentleman who was too badly hurt to be as haughty as he wished to be." Somebody at the table made a small noise. Orlando turned round to them all. He was aware that he had, in the space of a minute, ended a certain kind of quiet life, and he found the loss of it entirely tolerable. "I will tell you what you have been laughing at," he said. 14 months ago my chaise went into a ditch 9 miles from here in the worst weather of that winter. My arm was out of its socket and my coachman had a broken leg, and we would both have been dead of the cold by morning. This lady came out into that storm alone with a lantern. She put my shoulder back. She cut up her own clothing to strap it. She kept a fire alive for 6 hours and gave us the last of her bread, and when I offered her my purse she would not have it, and when I asked her name she would not give me that either, and I have been looking for her ever since. He let the silence go on until it had done its work. "So I would be glad," he said, "if the gentleman who put his boot out would tell me again which of us at this table is the servant." Holworth studied the tablecloth. Sir Gerald Fenmore recovered first, because greed is quick. He was on his feet with his glass up and his colour rising and his whole face rearranging itself into pride. "Well," he cried, "well, did I not always say the girl had quality in her? Did I not say so? Your Grace, this is a very great honour to this house, and I am sure that nothing would give me more pleasure than—" "Sit down," said the Duke of Greymarsh. He said it without heat. That was the thing Sir Gerald would remember at 3 in the morning for the rest of his life, that it had cost the Duke of Greymarsh no effort at all. "You will not be granted the living at Coron for your nephew," Orlando said. "You will not have the loan you wrote to my man of business about in September. You will not be at Greymarsh at Michaelmas, nor at any other time, and you will understand precisely why. You had a woman in this house who is worth every soul at this table put together, and you dressed her in an apron for 3 weeks to teach her humility. She has more of it than you will acquire if you live to be 90. Then he turned his back on the master of the house, which is a thing that cannot be forgiven and did not need to be, and spoke only to her. "Miss Fenmore, you have been offered enough this month by men who did not ask you first, so I will not do it. I have a carriage at the door. My aunt, Lady Ilminster, keeps a house at Coron and would be glad of you, and you may go there tonight and be under nobody's obligation, mine least of all. There is an income attached, and it is yours whatever else you choose. You need never see me again." Nerissa Fenmore untied her apron. She did it without hurry, folded it in half, and laid it on the sideboard beside the fish. Then she looked round the room, at her father, at her aunt, at the 18 faces, with an expression he could not read. "I will go," she said. "But not before I say that Mrs. Prewitt has cooked for this house for 22 years, and has never once had a word of thanks for it, and I have had more kindness in that kitchen these 3 weeks than in this dining room in 23 years. Then she walked out past all of them, in her grey stuff gown, with her chin exactly level. He did not ask her that night. He did not ask her for 3 weeks. He called at Coron on the 11th day and found her in the morning room with his aunt, in a plain blue gown of her own, reading the newspaper aloud with her feet on the fender, and Lady Ilminster laughing in a way she had not laughed since her husband died. He came again on the 15th day and the 18th. They walked to the harbour and back. He learned that her mother had been dead 11 years, that she had run her father's household since she was 16, that she had refused Mr. Pike of Kelsing because Mr. Pike had buried 2 wives young and the second one had written to her, and that on the night of the Barrowmere storm she had been out of doors at all because her father had turned her out for the night over a broken dish. She said that last part evenly, as one states a fact about weather. The Duke of Greymarsh walked half a mile without trusting himself to speak. He asked her on a Thursday in a garden with the sea below it. "You said you would not ask me," she said. "I said I would not ask you while you were standing in an apron. You are not standing in an apron." "No," she agreed. She looked at the water for a while. "I have been thinking about what I am worth. It is a new occupation and I find I am not very good at it yet." "Then let me hold the sum for you," Orlando said, "until you are." They were married at Coran in the spring and the town turned out for it, because the story had got about. Every word of it, the ditch and the lantern and the apron and the fish. And there is nothing an English town enjoys so much as a girl who was told to know her place walking into a church on a duke's arm. So Gerald Fenmore wrote 9 letters that first year. Nerissa answered every one, briefly and civilly, and settled £40 a year on Mrs. Prewitt the cook out her own pin money, and sent nothing whatever to her father, who found that his neighbours had somehow all heard exactly how his daughter came to be carrying soup. At Greymarsh she never once served at table. There was a whole household to do that, and they adored her, and the first thing she did as its mistress was to learn every one of their names. The wren handkerchief did not go back in a drawer. It was folded and framed under glass and hung in the little book room, where the 2 of them sat in the evenings, and when guests asked about it, a scrap of mended linen in a duke's house, among the portraits and the silver, the Duke of Greymarsh would look across the hearth at his wife, and take his time and say that it was the most valuable object on the